Hello everyone, this is Joshua Smith of Apollo's Artifacts. The focus of today's episode is going to be an Army War College report called Next Generation Bioweapons, the Technology of Genetic Engineering Applied to Biowarfare and Bioterrorism. This is taken from the Future Warfare Series, number 14, Air War College, Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. This was written in 2002. However, before we can even get to that, we need to follow up with some of the things that are going on currently, because I do believe these issues are intimately related. Here we have a story from Yahoo News. Headline: Suspected SARS virus and flu samples found in luggage. FBI report describes China's biosecurity risk. Now, it doesn't mention up here that not only was the SARS virus discovered, but also MERS. In late November 2018, just over a year before the first coronavirus case was identified in Wuhan, China, U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents at Detroit Metro Airport stopped a Chinese biologist with 3 vials labeled antibodies in his luggage. The biologist told the agents that a colleague in China had asked him to deliver the vials to a researcher at a U.S. institute. After examining the vials, however, customs agents came to an alarming conclusion. Quote, inspection of the writing on the vials and the stated recipient led inspection personnel to believe the materials contained within the vials may be viable MERS and SARS materials, says an unclassified FBI tactical intelligence report. The report was written by the Chemical and Biological Intelligence Unit of the FBI's Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate. They go on down here to quote a professor of global biosecurity who says that how do you know what they're bringing in and out unless you have a comprehensive surveillance point? If it's going one way, it's going the other way. You'd be very naive to assume otherwise. In other words, they're bringing in biological agents and taking out biological agents. Indeed, there have been Chinese individuals arrested for taking samples from biolabs in Canada back to China. It also goes on to admit here that some of these Chinese nationals who have brought samples in could also be carriers, but doing so unwittingly, thinking that they're perhaps bringing something else. But as we all know, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Come to a very important section here where it says concerns about Chinese biosafety are not new. For example, the SARS outbreak in 2003 was followed by several incidents of infections caused by laboratory accidents, including 8 cases that resulted from mishandling at the Chinese Institute of Virology in Beijing. So it's not entirely without possibility that there was some sort of an accident at Wuhan where there could have been a huge mistake made or an intentional release. No one really knows the truth. No one absolutely knows that this came from a wet market. They go on to quote leading authorities here who deny that it was constructed in a laboratory, but they also do not exclude the possibility that the virus spread due to poor biosecurity. They go on here to point out a number of recent cases where arrests have been made by the Justice Department and charges leveled against individuals in the United States, such as the chair of Harvard's Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology, for concealing ties to the Chinese government. This is a huge morass of problems that I've covered before in a previous episode, which I will link below. Here we have another article from The Sun. Germ warfare. FBI warned of biosecurity risk from China after finding SARS smuggled in scientists' luggage a year before coronavirus. Here we have an article from Foreign Policy. The Chinese Communist Party is setting up cells at universities across America. April 18, 2018. It's a strategy to tighten ideological control. And they admit here that it's something that the Chinese communist regime is doing all around the world. And it points out here that the entire purpose of this is to strengthen ideological guidance. In other words, what that means is to deeply ensconce the Chinese communist worldview into all of their persons around the world. They go down here to point out that these party cells have popped up all across the United States. Quote, the cells appear to be part of a strategy now expanded under Chinese President Xi Jinping to extend direct party control globally and to insulate students and scholars abroad from the influence of, quote, harmful ideology. That means freedom, capitalism, so on and so forth. Sometimes by asking members to report on each other's behaviors and beliefs. And this is the forum it'll come in. All of these innocent-looking people who you very well could run into on any college campus, but yet the guiding ideology is, of course, communism. The article goes on to point out here, further, the U.S.-based party branches are part of a growing network of cells located on campuses in Canada, Mexico, Chile, Australia, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Greece, South Korea, Thailand, and elsewhere. And it is part of a comprehensive strategy to make China number one in the world. And just to take a very recent look at some of the things taking place in China, we see the discrimination. It's very common in China being turned against Africans. There are complaints coming in from Nigeria and from Kenya about the way that their people are being treated by the communist Chinese. These people are being denied homes, they're being thrown out of apartments, they're being denied jobs, they're being denied service inside of stores and restaurants. But of course you won't hear the American left here make a peep about it because they adore and worship China no matter what.
Nigeria. Okay. I'm coming.
Here we can see part of a quick video where you can see Nigerians being given food there because they're being denied food by the communist Chinese. Here's another article substantiating the same claim: Kenyans, Africans facing open racism in China amidst coronavirus pandemic. It begins here in a bit of bad irony. The country where this coronavirus originated is openly discriminating against black Africans for fear that they will spread the virus to them. This is despite the fact that Africa is the least affected region, with most of its cases imported. And videos are beginning to pour out showing that Kenyans, among others, are being thrown out of their homes. But to hone the focus back in on where we're headed, here's an article from The Hill, The Coronavirus, Blueprint for Bioterrorism. It opens here: regardless of the source of the coronavirus, it is now a roadmap for future bioterrorism. The damage has been quick and enormous, much greater than 9/11 and worldwide. The responses have been predictable and ineffective, and the cost of a potential weapon such as this is close to zero. It represents the perfect asymmetric warfare strategy, and there should be little doubt these lessons are being studied carefully by military planners in North Korea, Tehran, Moscow, Beijing, and desert caves throughout the Middle East. And here this article goes on to point out something that I have warned about before. It says a coronavirus attack also could be a strategic distraction for a larger military or political play. For example, no terror group would take credit for an initial attack. For example, if they plan to release a similar, more deadly strain to create real panic and social collapse. And I've said that before. What if this is merely the beta test? We don't want to see what alpha looks like. Here's an article from February of 2020 when it was still okay to speculate about where the coronavirus came from. Genie from a war lab did the novel coronavirus leak out from a Biowar lab in Wuhan. This article indeed goes on to quote a couple of different sources which are suggestive of the concept that this did come from a lab, whether through intentional release or accidental. Next, we'll move back further in time to an article published in Microbial Biotechnology from August of 2012, titled The Future of Biological Warfare. The outline of it opens here. It is an axiom of human history that whatever technology is available will be applied in warfare as one side or the other seeks to gain an advantage. Humans are unique among the species in their capacity for fighting prolonged conflicts where the nature of the war reflects the types of technologies available. Stone, metal, leather, wood, domesticated animals, wheels, etc. were each exploited by ancient societies in warfare. Moving down a bit further here, we see it says, given the human track record for conflict and the potential power of biological warfare, we are led to the sad conclusion that biological warfare has a future, and that society must prepare for the eventuality that it will be used again by either nations or individuals. The article is fascinating in that it basically concludes what we already seem to know now, which is that the modern world is not at all prepared for a major pathogenic threat. Finally, I come to an article in Forbes by Lauren Thompson. The threat of biological warfare is increasing and the U.S. isn't ready. And as you can see, this is from April 9th, 2018. We pick up here a bit further down. So a blue ribbon study panel on biodefense got it right in 2016 when it warned that, quote, our nation remains woefully underprepared for dangerous biological incidents. But you didn't need a government commission to know that. All you need to do is look at our uncertain response to recent outbreaks of Ebola and Zika to see how unready we are. Thus, biowar could be the next big asymmetric threat, and unlike in the case of any other methods of mass murder that our enemies might embrace, the destructive effects of releasing engineered pathogens don't necessarily dissipate with time. They may actually grow worse as the microbes mutate. And that is one of the bigger concerns for the current COVID pandemic. What is going to happen when the fall and winter come back around after this summer? We come down here a bit more where he makes some really good points. He says, but why, you might ask, would any rational adversary embrace such an indiscriminate form of warfare today, even if it could fashion pathogens of similar or greater virulence? The answer is twofold. First, some of the enemies we face today are not rational in the sense that term is used in the West. They believe they serve a higher purpose. Think of ISIS. But second, when an aggressor nation has the tools to synthesize unique microorganisms, it can also engineer vaccines that confer immunity on its own population. And he closes out with these ominous words: we are teetering on the edge of a biological abyss, oblivious to the dangers that lie ahead. Our failure to prepare in even the most rudimentary ways is an invitation to the worst asymmetric threat that America is ever likely to face. And finally, now I turn to the main event, the document, Next Generation Bioweapons, Technology of Genetic Engineering Applied to Biowarfare and Bioterrorism. He, of course, opens discussing the much-covered Spanish influenza, but we move down here to the third paragraph where it says, in this century, it is widely predicted that advances in biology and biotechnology will revolutionize society and life as we know it. At the same time, the black biology of biotechnology, which can be used to create biological weapons, will be one of the gravest threats we will face. His concluding line here of the opening, the next generation of biological weapons made possible through genetic engineering will be asymmetric weapons par excellence. He spends the next several pages going through an overview of the Soviet Union's previously existing biological warfare program, information, of course, which very likely would have been passed on to the Communist Chinese at a later date. And after he has covered that, he begins to discuss what are called RMAs, or Revolutions in Military Affairs. We come down here to what is numbered page 24 in the PDF document, which will be linked below. He says, quote, genetically engineered pathogens would likely prove to be a more difficult challenge than the 2001 anthrax attacks. Most likely, they would be novel in characteristics with either higher transmissivity, which is something that we see with COVID-19, communicability, or antibiotic resistance. Such tailoring of classical pathogens could make them harder to detect, diagnose, and treat. In effect, they would be more militarily useful. Obviously, a vaccine would not be available for a novel pathogen. Biological warfare expert Stephen Block outlines other qualitative differences and attributes possibly expected from genetically engineered pathogens. They could be made safer to handle, easier to distribute, capable of ethnic specificity, or be made to cause higher morbidity or mortality rates. Unless, of course, the goal is economic destruction and not the destruction of people, which is precisely what we have seen take place here. And recall here that this document is from 2002. Under the category Offensive Biological Weapons Capabilities. The Office of the Secretary of Defense has identified countries that maintain various levels of offensive biological warfare capabilities or research facilities. This list includes Russia, China, Iraq, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Libya, India, and Pakistan. And in one of the more important sections here, we have page 26 of the PDF. The pathogen may be released clandestinely, so there will be a delay between exposure and onset of symptoms. Days to weeks later, when people do develop symptoms, they could immediately start spreading contagious diseases. By that time, many people will likely be hundreds of miles away from where they were originally exposed, possibly at multiple international sites. Acutely ill victims may present themselves in large numbers to emergency rooms and other medical treatment facilities. In this scenario, medical professionals would be on the front lines of the attack. If the pathogen was highly contagious, medics would then become secondarily infected. Unsuspecting hospitals would become contaminated and soon overwhelmed. This would necessitate the quarantine of a large number of people, with the situation exacerbated by the declining numbers of medical caregivers. The media would contribute to public anxiety. Of course the media would. That's their role. They love that role. Civil disorder and chaos may ensue. We have very little experience in coping with such an epidemic. Advanced warning of an impending specific bioterrorist incident, especially with a genetically engineered biological weapons agent, will be extremely rare, similar to an emerging disease outbreak. Unless we happen to have excellent intelligence, we can only be prepared to respond after the fact. He goes back further to discuss a meeting of experts that took place in 1997, laying out 6 broad groups of potential futuristic threats. These are binary biological weapons, meaning a double-layered weapon, one where you have something that is perhaps innocuous at first until it is combined with another agent of some sort. Designer genes, gene therapy as a weapon, stealth viruses, host-swapping diseases, that would be something that jumps, say, from snakes to bats to humans, and designer diseases. And he goes on to define and explain each of these 6 categories, which you can look up and read for yourself. They're very interesting for sure. Now we'll scroll down through that so you can just have a brief look at it if you like. As we come to the portion where he has his conclusions, he says here, quote, "We remain grossly ill-prepared to respond to an epidemic caused by a novel, genetically engineered biological agent." He also adds that in asymmetric warfare, biological weapons are seen as a great equalizer. And finally, his conclusion, the 20th century was dominated by physics, but recent breakthroughs indicate that the next 100 years likely will be the biological century. There are those who say the First World War was chemical, the Second World War was nuclear, and that the Third World War, God forbid, will be biological. And finally, I would like to point out one last thing, a book called Seeds of Fire, China and the Story Behind the Attack on America by Gordon Thomas. This book came out in 2001. It barely mentioned anything about China possibly having some involvement with Al-Qaeda and the 9/11 attacks, so a lot of people criticized it then without actually looking down the road and considering what Gordon Thomas was actually talking about, which is China's plan to dominate the entire world. And in reflection of these most recent events, it may be a good idea to check this book out. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.